Hi, this is Raghu Bala with the Module 5 roundup video. So this week we saw other types of AI, and some of the other ones that were mentioned in the videos were rule-based systems or narrow intelligence in the form of chess game playing systems, as well as probabilistic reasoning and so on. Now onto the some of the points that came out of the class this week. One interesting thing was, I think Professor Winston mentioned in his video, talk about Google giving away software, but they'll never give away their data. So that's kind of an interesting business model if you start to think of it. Us software engineers, myself included, tend to want to hold on to the code that we wrote, but thinking of it in a kind of a reverse way, one might think like, okay, give away whatever you coded, but the data that's collected is more valuable. So it's an interesting way to look at the world. And I think most of the big companies actually do that. They give away a lot of software to open source and so on, but they hold the data very dear because that is fodder for machine learning and human behavior and can be monetized and so on. So just for those who are interested in entrepreneurship, something to sort of take away from the course. In terms of the videos themselves, I thought Professor Winston's video was pretty interesting. He talked about AI, and he kind of broke it down into, ultimately machines will start to mention their own stories. And also he kind of said that AI is broken up into artificial perception, story understanding, recipe following, and then reasoning. And then one of the features that human beings had was the ability to merge, which is between perception and sequencing of events. And I think he sort of like alluded to the fact that other sort of forms of beings and mammals and so on don't have that capability, which basically sort of like distinguishes human intelligence from other forms of beings. And then just the Professor Lowe's video is pretty interesting. He talked about personalized portfolios and how you can create an equalizer equivalent to your graphic equalizer, how you can do that for index funds. And then he talked about in the past they had weighted the indexes in a different way because the amount of transaction costs and operational nightmare that took place. But nowadays everything is automated and it's much easier to sort of create index funds with a different portfolio strategy and stuff like that. So that's for those coming from a finance background and so on. Something to take note of, or perhaps utilize in your daily work as well, and also probably already happening, by the way. And then we went on to Professor Arthur's video, which was talking about 2 points. One is the O-ring principle, which basically says that as you start to automate things around the work that you do, then what ends up happening is the stuff that you do as part of the entire equation. Let's say there were 10 tasks to do, but one or two were done by humans, and then the other 8 could be automated. Then the focus becomes on one of those two areas that are human created, and then then the focus becomes like the O-ring, which is if that particular part that is done by the human is not is a weak link, then that tends to get reflected and magnified. And then obviously if you do it well, then that it gets magnified in the right way as well. And then the other thing was invention is the mother of necessity as opposed to the other way around. It's a kind of interesting statement where basically if you start to invent things, and then people will find uses for it. And this was echoed later on, for example, when Professor Roos started talking about the number of jobs created by social media. Social media didn't exist. Let's say, Facebook, I think, if my memory serves me right, around 2005 time frame. And prior to that, you didn't have, jobs like a social media manager and things like that. So since social media came about, and then there's the need for a social media manager role to be created. So sort of like if something gets invented, then for example, there are new jobs called drone pilots, and when drones were not around, no drone pilot work as well. So sort of like invention creates a necessity for certain jobs to happen, and so on and so forth. And an interesting comparison between Saudi Arabia and Norway as to, like, how the satisfaction of people and how it ties into the wealth of a country is not really tied one to one with the satisfaction of people, how that could be improved and things like that. So that's a couple of things that he kind of pointed out that I took notes of. And then we went on to Professor Roos. She always has some interesting examples. She mentioned three that were particularly interesting about, like, cabbies in New York, that one could optimize the solution a little bit more by using AI, and the number of cars to serve the needs of the city could be optimized from the current 14,000 taxis down to 3,000. I don't know if that'll happen, but at least theoretically, that's where she was going with that. And then the example about how human and machine intelligence could be combined in radiology to reduce errors by zero to down to 0.5%. And that goes back to the very first, I think, couple of weeks where we talked about using AI as a human assistant. And then the other example that was pretty interesting, actually, I'm kind of surprised no startups have evolved in the space, which is about blind people utilizing cameras and different types of sensors adapt better in their environment. And also, I think down the road, when autonomous cars become possible, you'll begin to see the mobility of those who are disabled in any way in terms of motion or vision and things like that. Their ability to participate in various activities will improve significantly. And in fact, there was one post that I did on LinkedIn about a couple of weeks ago. Sony had reintroduced actually this AIBO, I think AIBO. I think that's they have a mechanical kind of a robotic dog, and someone had posted that dog had come back onto the market after some time. That now that robotics is back in vogue, I think they brought it back. But what would have been interesting if my post was like, what if that dog was a seeing eye dog? Instead of just being a toy, it could actually do something useful in the world, where the dog could help a person without sight to navigate through their surroundings. That would be a kind of a useful use case instead of just being a toy. And I think that will happen eventually. People will get around to doing that. And then a couple of last points here. Dr. Roos mentioned humans. The whole debate seems to be, I think, around this whole fear that machines will start to replace humans. And I think we are far from it. And she mentioned it in a couple of ways. One was that humans have perception, reasoning, communication, and creativity. And I think the reasoning part of it sort of like ties back into what Professor Winston said about merge. And the funny thing is, when I went to college way back when, actually I used Professor Winston's AI book. It was a red color book. I think in one of my home cleaning exercises, it got donated to the library. I wish I still had it. But it was back when AI was pretty hot, and then kind of cooled off a number of years, couple of decades actually, and then now it's back in vogue. But he was the professor whose book I actually used as textbook in school. So kind of interesting. Anyway, and then in terms of communication, she mentioned perception, reason, communication, creativity. Communication, she said, humans have the ability to persuade. Let's say a judge can be persuaded by a lawyer in a, let's say, a legal suit and things like that. And that's something that machines would have a very difficult time doing over time, and those are very reasonable points. The other one she mentioned was the accuracy in terms of let's say tagging photos. If you're 80% accurate, it's okay. 20% error is acceptable, but then that's not the same case with autonomous cars, where lives are dependent on mission critical. Things could go terribly wrong if your accuracy was only 80%. So a number of interesting examples of how AI can be used in different applications, different ways, and comparing and contrasting where how AI, trying to get around the fear of whether AI will replace humans and stuff like that. Another topic this week covered was the one by Professor E.R. Rawan on ethics and AI. And he provided a framework for ethics and AI by stating that machines need to be governed and monitored, and the one way to do it was to have a human in the loop. But then as things progress, um, to probably figure out how we can have society in the loop. And he gave a good example about autopilot versus human pilots in his video. And also he provided a kind of a framework about the four functions or factors that impact um, how society as a whole accepts decisions and so on. For example, there's laws, there are norms, there are market forces and industry standards, and also the architecture of systems. So these are the four elements that he brought about in his discussion. And then finally, he also covered autonomous vehicles and ethics. And this is kind of timely because in the news recently, there's a case about autonomous vehicle getting into an accident, and ultimately a camera showed that it was the pedestrian at fault. So this topic is very timely as far as what's going on in the real world, and also there's some ethical questions as to how AI was at fault, which means the car was at fault, or whether the human was at fault, and so on and so forth. This week, we had a number of good posts, and I wanted to highlight three of them. Now, Vanessa Gordon, she posted this article on will automation take away all of our jobs? I think this is top of mind for a lot of people, and there are a lot of articles going around on the internet. Some sort of fear mongering, others sort of a little bit more balanced. But definitely take a look at this article because I think it's one of the better ones out there on this particular topic. Uh, the next two posts are interesting. Jorge Tarida, uh, nice videos about Google's quantum computing. And he's posted two YouTube videos that you guys should take a look at. Quantum computing, as you know, is on the horizon, and sort of a different take on computing compared to supercomputers. In fact, there's a thing going on where Google is now claiming quantum supremacy, and IBM is disagreeing to that fact. And this quantum supremacy means that certain computations can be done significantly faster. So apparently, Google is saying that there's one computation that an IBM supercomputer will take 10,000 years to do, and they can do it in 200 seconds. So obviously, IBM said no to that, and says that it'll take them a couple of days. And then I think the experts are on IBM side, but still a couple of days versus 200 seconds, I think is still a significant leap. So there's a new way of doing computing. Once this comes into view, a lot of things will change. For example, some of these cryptographic algorithms and other things will start to break because people like a lot of cryptography is based on the fact that it takes a lot of effort and time, and the current standards like SHA-256 and so on, the goal is it'll take about 40 years for someone to break it with enough computing power. But now with quantum computers, someone can break it very quickly, then that algorithm is no longer viable and one needs to switch. So you'll see a lot of activity in that area, I'm assuming. But quantum computing is probably needed when we get into things like self-driving cars or recognizing something immediately, like a scenery, um, in order to act on it, like for drones to move and avoid collision and stuff like that, or to know where to land, stuff like that. So anyway, this is an important development. Also, I can see a lot of AI at the edge using quantum computing. The third one is Reiko Tarida. And it's a very interesting post from The Verge. It's about Twitter taking Microsoft's chatbot, and then once this chatbot is trained on the Twitter feed, um, then it starts to become a racist. So why do we bring this up? Because now we think of AI and computers in general being objective and so on, but now if a chatbot, if it's trained on the wrong data, it tends to behave in a manner that we do not want it to behave. So that's the moral of the story here. I think it's a good post, and definitely take a look at this one as well. So that brings us to a close of week number 5, and you guys are quickly moving into the last week here. And it was a pleasure having all of you, and hopefully you can turn in a good sixth week assignment, and then that will culminate in this course. And so and good luck to everyone going forward and in your learning journey. And I'll be posting some follow-on courses and material in the week 6 discussion forum for those interested in learning more about AI and so on. Thank you, and have a good learning journey ahead.